go over the Harlem Renaissance art pieces that you analyzed yesterday and the day before. So let's go over first the definition of the Harlem Renaissance. And the Harlem Renaissance was a blossoming of African American culture, particularly in the creative arts in Harlem, New York. Okay, particularly is important because the Harlem Renaissance was in Harlem, and originally, and a lot of art came from Harlem, but because of the Great Migration, when African American people moved from the rural South to large north and western cities, because that happened, there was a blossoming of African American culture in all the cities that they moved to, in Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, just to name a few. But the Harlem Renaissance is notably recognized, I guess, as Harlem because that's where a lot of art happened. It was kind of the epicenter of this blossoming of art. And Harlem, New York is just a neighborhood in New York City, kind of like how Koreatown is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. Harlem, New York is a neighborhood in New York City. Okay, this happened from 1918 to 1937, so shortly after World War I, and it continued shortly after the Great Depression, but eventually stopped because the Great Depression impacted everyone, and the art just kind of stopped blossoming at that point. Through literature, music, theater, and visual arts, participants sought to reconceptualize the Negro apart from the white stereotypes. I'm going to pause there. So this is a really important part of the definition of the Harlem Renaissance. The art of the Harlem Renaissance was somewhat political. It was very much about identity because Black people were reconceptualizing their own identity and saying, this is who we are, and creating their own narratives through art, not for the first time ever, but in a way that was largely influential and in a way that a lot more people were paying attention to. And then this reconceptualization of Black identity influenced Black people's relationship to their heritage. So some of this art might reference back to life in the South, or Black history, or stereotypes that have been created throughout history of Black people, or their identity in relation to each other or to themselves. So let's keep that all in mind while we're analyzing these images and poems. So this first one, Sourcing, this is by artist Aaron Douglas. The title is Aspiration, and the date is 1936. So we know that's a hint as to this being part of the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, aspiration, to aspire to do something. You usually hope, you aspire to do something. You don't, it's always an actionable goal. So aspire to create something, aspire to achieve something. So keep that in mind as we're looking at this. Okay, this image. We see three people. Do we know these people are African American? Yes. This person has an afro. That's one hint. There's also in the background down here, we see hands in shackles and chains, suggesting slavery. Okay. What do we see as we go? Also, if you notice, this image is it's a square and almost like a compass, like a geography compass. The hands are in the south and the building is in the northeast. Okay, so going up a little bit north, we see these three people. What are in their hands? We see a book. We see something like a beaker in this middleman's hand. We see a measuring tool, maybe some sort of architecture, in the third guy to the left, his hand, and then also a globe, suggesting worldly culture, maybe science, geography, etc. So these people, these Black people who've had chains on their wrists, theoretically in their lifetime, are now free, and they have all of this knowledge and creativity to show the world now that their chains are off. And where are they going to show it? They're going to follow this northern star to industrialized land in the Northeast, maybe Harlem. And there they are going to show that they are more than just slaves. They are multifaceted people with lots of skills and intelligence. Going back to this definition, reconceptualizing Negro, Black identity, apart from white stereotypes. Okay? So Aaron Douglas is drawing Black people not as slaves or servants or anything like that, as people with these skills and intelligence that they're going to show in the North. And we know this is part of the Harlem Renaissance, with the symbols of the book and maybe architecture and worldly knowledge, and going to the Northeast, suggesting Great Migration, to aspire to achieve a new, better life. Okay, so that's that one. Hopefully that makes sense, or more sense, or maybe you're like, yeah, I got that already the first time, but good to know. Okay, this next painting, we're going to see the sourcing, Palmer Hayden, The Janitor Who Paints. Okay. Kind of suggestive title, right? The Janitor Who Paints, challenging maybe notion of what a janitor does, qualifying it with a janitor who paints. And it's in 1937 at the very end of the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, how does this reconceptualize Black identity? Well, let's first of all look at some symbols. We see smiling Black person, Black baby, and this man who is wearing a blue collar. By the way, blue collar jobs are manual labor jobs. So a janitor is a blue collar worker. Okay. How's that reconceptualizing a stereotype? Well, if you saw this man walking down the street in his blue collar and just thought, oh, he's a janitor, literally with the trash, you might think, okay, that guy doesn't have any skills. That's why he's a janitor. Or not you, but that's the stereotype, right? He's a janitor, low-skilled worker, whatever that means. But this artist, Palmer Hayden, is challenging that stereotype by saying, actually, this janitor has skills beyond just manual labor. And actually, he's a great artist. He's a painter. And that's something that he's maybe not given the chance to do. And through this painting, he's showing African Americans reconceptualized as beyond service worker, beyond quote menial labor. So we know that this is part of the Harlem Renaissance, since it's reconceptualizing white stereotypes towards Black people. Because a janitor is painting, a janitor is doing something that might be considered, like a higher class activity, or something that might be valued in like more like higher class society. So that's something to think about and consider when interpreting this. Yeah, okay, next one. All right, Langston Hughes' poem. I think you guys have read this one before with Mr. Rivas. I too, saying I also, I asserting himself, saying, establishing his own inclusion in society. I too, date 1926. That's a big hint on how you might know that this text or image is from the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, so I too sing America. Okay, I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and go strong. Okay, whether they are his own family and there's some sort of like internalized racism for being the darker brother, or whether they, more likely the people he's working with or working for, they send him to eat in the kitchen because he is darker, because he is black. Okay, he laughs though. He knows that this is not his truth. That he's being under valued, and he's going to grow strong because tomorrow, in the future, he's hopeful about the future. He'll be at the table. This is showing the hope and the redefining of Black identity during the Harlem Renaissance, because there's freedom with the Great Migration. Black people are experiencing freedoms just shortly after being emancipated from slavery. Tomorrow I'll be at the table. He sees a momentum for equality in America. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. Okay? So they'll see how beautiful he is, maybe reconceptualizing the Negro apart from white stereotypes. You know, there's a lot of media images of Black people that were very racist and dehumanizing. He's saying Black is beautiful. I am beautiful. He's asserting his beauty and reconceptualizing that idea of not being beautiful for being African American. Okay, so he's challenging that. Also thinking of their heritage. He's saying I too am America. I'm not out of this history of America. I'm just as much America as a white person. And people will see that, probably through the works of the Harlem Renaissance. And as African American voices become louder with the freedoms that they will slowly and surely gain as they integrate into white American society in the North and the West, and even in the South post-slavery. Take a look. 1926, okay. 1865 was when African Americans, or 1863, were freed. There's definitely people who were alive during slavery. So this is pretty cool that he is speaking. He's like, redefining African American identity, maybe for the first time post-slavery. Not just him, but the Harlem Renaissance artists are doing this redefinition of African American identity post-slavery in a very influential way. Okay, and then last one. I'm not sure if you got this reference to the strange fruit, but this song is about lynching in the South. And actually, the person who wrote it was a Jewish man in New York. And, we can guess that, or I think I actually did read that, he saw and witnessed, or he read about the lynchings that were happening in the South and was alarmed that people did not pay attention to that so much. Like white people in the North did not seem to care. Perhaps because of his Jewish identity, Jewish people are historically an oppressed religious minority group. Maybe he had more empathy for the African American people, or maybe he was just an empathetic dude apart from his identity. Either way, he wrote this song, which was performed and made popular by Harlem Renaissance jazz singer Billie Holiday in 1939, shortly after the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, still close enough in time to attribute this song to the Harlem Renaissance. And there's really intense symbolism about lynching, right? Lynching being hanging African American people from trees in the South. So you can see those really intense images. And how does this relate to the Harlem Renaissance? Well, once again, this is reestablishing Black people's relationship to their heritage and to each other. And white people might not have been paying so much attention to the Black struggles, at least in the North. You know, they might have kind of known the horrors of slavery, but this is the first time that, and one of the first times during the Harlem Renaissance, when African Americans are saying, "This is our this is our story. This is how we remember our heritage." It was not a happy experience in the South, and it's establishing a reconceptualization of Black history by really emphasizing the horrors of lynching by using this imagery that is sure poetic, but is very close to reality, or is realistic too. So that's kind of how you can know this is from the Harlem Renaissance, like establishing like a Black voice establishing their own history. It was performed by Billie Holiday, so she's a Black woman, our Harlem Renaissance artist, and this song was very popular at this time. So yeah, hopefully that last part makes sense. This one's a little bit less about this Black identity, where you could see that more with these three images, but this one's more about the heritage. Okay, so make sure you answer the questions on the slides. We'll answer them on Schoology after watching this video, and then stay tuned for the Great Depression lecture.